Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I have the special pleasure to share with you some of the magic that Mikhail Tal created, and surprisingly, not in the middle games, not in combinations, but in the endgames. He is, of course, very well known as being one of the most brilliant tacticians of all times. However, we shall see that he knows what to do in endgames as well when he needs to. He just used to prefer to lead the games to more wild, crazy, tactical areas. Okay, so let's see the first example. Here we go. This is a game of Mikhail Tal as white against Ilya Smirin back in 1990. Well, what do we see so far in this position? One thing we see is that the black rook on e4 is attacking white's bishop, right? So that needs to be attended to. The other important thing we see is that the white rook is in an excellent position on d8, pinning black's bishop. So those are the two most important things here. If white would get the opportunity to use that pin, potentially white could win a piece. However, that's certainly easier said than done. In the meantime, what white needs to address is whether to move the bishop or to protect it. And on black's side, black should be looking for ways trying to unpin the bishop. What may be an opportunity to achieve that? Well, a typical way to do it would be if that b pawn would advance, and then the black bishop could develop to b7, in which case the bishop is protecting the rook in the corner and therefore everything is okay. The other option would be if black would succeed to chase out the white rook that's right now occupying that powerful d8 square. But that doesn't look very easy at all because, for example, even if the black king would get to f6 and e7, the white rook could just move away and still remain on the 8th rank or double up, for example. So those are the key plans, ideas that are in the picture. Now, one thing you need to remember that whenever you are pinning a piece, and if it's not an absolute pin, but it's a relative pin, that means a king is not involved in it. I have to be very careful because it can all of a sudden turn around, turn 180 degrees, and that very same pin can become a discovery. A perfect example of that would be if white right now in this position would choose to protect the bishop with the king. All of a sudden, black would get the opportunity to capture white's bishop and then follow it up with bishop g4, check, and then capturing the white rook. And even after f3, black could win a pawn and get to an endgame with a clear advantage. So that's certainly something not to do for white, but it's quite important to understand these ideas and patterns to avoid falling into traps. Then the next question is, okay, so we cannot really well protect the bishop. Where should we move it? Well, ideally, we want to move the bishop in a way that it also attacks the rook at the same time. Well, there are two such choices. At first, it seems that clearly the bishop would need to go this way, so it hangs on to the c4 pawn at the same time. However, as we shall see, this is actually inferior to what Mikhail Tal did. In this case, black would succeed to get the rook back to e7, and then on the next move, first of all threaten with rook d7 to exchange that rook, because it would be kind of a forking situation between the rook on d8 and the bishop on d3, so white would have no choice but to trade. And also the other idea is just to play b6 followed by bishop b7. So let's see what happened in the game instead, where Tal actually played the active bishop f3. There are two key differences in positioning the bishop on f3 versus d3. One is that black will have a lot bigger difficulty in playing b6 because the c6 pawn will be hanging. And the second big difference is that white hasn't covered up the d file. So if the rook retreats to e7 with the idea of rook d7 next, then after the white rook doubles up on the d file, that's no longer possible, and black remains in the extremely passive position. After bishop went to f3, black responded by grabbing the pawn with a check at it. Came king d2. Now white's plan is pretty clear. If black would do nothing, white would just get the rook to the open file and then double up on the 8th rank, use the pin, win the bishop, and the game. So black needs to act actually quite quickly, making sure to prepare something against this plan. And the best option that black had here was, and what black should have done, is to play b6 with the idea to then play bishop b7, even if it would mean to give a pawn up along the way. White could continue now either with rook e1, or another option would be rook c1, take, and after bishop b7 play rook d7. With a slight advantage for white. Let's go back one more time and see after king d2 what happened when black played c5, which was a clearly inferior move to b6. The idea is that if white now plays the natural rook e1 move, all of a sudden black gets out of the pin with the same idea we've seen earlier by black playing rook c2, king c2, bishop f5. The point being that now, if the rook retreats, black is ready to play c4 and win back the rook. That was the whole point behind black playing c5. If black would have tried the same trick immediately, playing rook c2 instead of c5, the big difference would have been that black, after rook c2, king c2, bishop f5 check, rook d3, black is not ready to play c4 right now, and therefore, after bishop takes rook, king takes, white will be up a bishop. So that's kind of a cute trick. However, white, of course, is not forced to fall into it. After c5, and white did not fall for it, white played rook c1, encouraging the exchange of the rooks. And black exchanged rooks, although it would have been clearly better to do so by checking on d4 and exchanging that extremely powerful rook on d8. As you shall see after this exchange, black is stuck, pretty much stuck forever. It's highly unlikely that black can get out of that pin. The bishop cannot move because the rook is hanging. The b pawn cannot advance because it's also pinned by white's bishop. And the king moving to f6 wouldn't help much because the rook would simply move over to e8, not allowing the black king to get closer to the white rook. Instead, the game continued with black playing h5 and white very typically playing h4, making sure those pawns stop right there. Came rook b8, rook e8, making sure the king will not cross that e file. f6, and now the king is trying to get closer, but the bishop prevents it. Bishop d5, g5, and of course we don't need to give any counter chances by trading and allowing a potential passed h-pawn for black, just g3. Takes, king g6, king d2, b5, king e3, b4, and now white played a3. Perhaps not the only move to win, but certainly does the job. Takes, takes. A5, as you can see, the black pieces cannot move, only the pawns. King 4. A4, F3. And now black basically is running out of moves. Came King G7, and finally it was ready in an optimal situation to play bishop to E6 and use the pin. Although white could have done that earlier, there was no reason to rush it, and in fact it makes a little bit of a difference that now the black king is not protecting the H5 pawn, as you shall see in a minute. Black took, Rook B8. Now white's threat is to play Rook B5 to create a skewer on the black pawns along the 5th rank. A B3, Rook B5, and black resigned. A very nice technical example by Mikhail Tal. Let's move on to our next example, which is another endgame played by the magician from Riga. In that game, he reached this position, which is a position again with equal material. Instead of having 4 rooks and 2 bishops, this time it's switched around. We're having 2 rooks and 4 bishops. And typically situations like this end in a draw. However, in this case, just like in the previous one, because of tactical reasons, actually things get pretty sharp. I would suggest you take a little bit of time and try to figure out what kind of tactics or game plans are here in the picture for white. Again, just like in the last position, the white bishop is under attack and needs to decide where to go or not to go. White played quite brilliantly by playing e6 right away, sacrificing the bishop. First of all, let's see what happens if indeed black accepts that invitation. Actually, that is exactly what black did in the game. After rook takes d5, now white has a discovery at hand. Now it's important to point out that if white would just do the natural thing in winning black's rook with rook d3, black would block the check, and then after the exchange of the bishops and capturing of the rook, the king could capture the pawn. And now, even though white still has a material advantage, black has a dangerous pass pawn on the queen side, so things are not quite as simple at all. Going back to the beginning, e6, rook d5. So winning the black rook doesn't necessarily resolve the issues. It's much better to play rook c8 check. What happens now? It's a discovered check. If the king moves out of it, white is ready to checkmate immediately with rook h8. But what happens if black blocks the check? Well, that was exactly white's game plan. Then the response is to play rook c7 check. King g8 and bishop f6. And now, in addition to white's terribly dangerous e-passed pawn, white is threatening to checkmate as well by playing rook c8 followed by rook h8 checkmate. It's important to notice that even though black almost checkmates after bishop f3 and then bringing the rook down, ultimately it is white who gives the real checkmate first. So let's go all the way back and examine the situation. What happens if after the correct e6 move, black does not capture the bishop but understands the trouble coming, and instead of rook d5 continues with rook d8, guarding the back rank, and also puts the rook onto a protected square. So therefore, the discovered check with rook c8 loses purpose. Here the correct check is to play rook c7, discovered check, attacking the bishop. King moves to f8, protecting it. And this is the key moment which probably black overlooked at some earlier point when allowed white's e6 move. White now has a brilliant move by playing bishop to f6. The idea being that if bishop takes, then rook f7, if king e8, then bishop c6, or if king g8, then rook takes f6. Now the threat is pretty obvious to advance the pawn to e7 with a discovery. And after rook d5, e7, rook e5, white gets to play rook f8 just on time. King g7, pawn promotes, takes, bishop c4, and white just on time will succeed to play rook b8 before that b pawn runs away too far. And unlike in one of the earlier variations that we've seen, the black king now is still pretty far away in aiding the black pawn. Let's go back one more time all the way to the beginning and see what happens if after e6, rook d8, rook c7, king f8, the brilliant bishop f6, if now black captures the bishop on d5, not on f6. Then white should just take king e8 and just go back to f6. And as unfortunately as the black pieces are positioned, black is unable to defend against rook c8. A pretty amazing endgame. And let's see one more interesting endgame from Mikhail Tal's practice. Here we are. In this position, certainly black is doing quite well, being up already 2 pawns. However, white is clearly pressuring 2 of those pawns, the one on c5 and the one on e6. In fact, if black would go to protect the c pawn with the rook from e7, the e6 pawn would be lost. And typically, if in a rook endgame one side is up only 1 pawn, in I would say more than half of the situations, the other side can save the game. So therefore, it is quite crucial for black not to lose either of those pawns, or if they do, they should get significant compensation for it in winning an even stronger piece, or maybe even checkmate. I suggest you take a few minutes and try to figure out on your own how Tal won the game real quick in this position. It's important to notice that the white king, even though it's an endgame, and despite the fact that the king is right in the middle of the board, it has no moves. In any situation that you see that the king has no moves whatsoever, it's always a hint that it may be the time to look for ways in how to checkmate the king. And this is one of those situations. Tal magically created a checkmate net around the king, played rook d7, threatening with immediate checkmate with rook to d4, and after white captured the pawn on d3, he just connected the 2 rooks on the 3rd rank, creating a pretty much unavoidable checkmate threat with rook h3 to e3. Pretty impressive. Of course, white could have continued the game, white resigned, but could have continued with rook c7, delaying it a move, or playing f5 and trying to create an escape square on f4. But then also after king g5, white pretty much runs out of those little delaying moves and ultimately will be checkmated by rook h3 to e3. Pretty impressive, I would say. And finally, let's go to the jewel of the week. Here we go. This beautiful endgame has been composed by Kubel in 1928. If you look at the position at first, we see that materially it's pretty even, or if anybody, it is black who is ahead, having 4 pawns against white's extra knight. However, if we'll have a deeper look, we'll see that the black king is kind of in an unfortunate position. In fact, If could the white queen jump over the pawn on d5, white could checkmate immediately by playing queen a8. Well, luckily for black, of course, white cannot do that. So the question is, how can white create some amazing tactics to make it all come together to either checkmate black or win the black queen? As usual, take your time and try to figure out on your own. I have the experience that when I'm trying to figure out things on my own and put a little sweat in it, there is a better result in remembering and maintaining that pattern than if I just listen through or read through a book with the correct solution. So first, give it a try on your own. You may spend 10, 15, 20 minutes if you have the time, and then come back and see the solution. The brilliant move is to play d6. It's quite easy to see that if queen captures, then knight f7. Fork, winning the queen. It is also quite obvious that if black moves the queen to some other place, white will immediately checkmate with queen a8. So really there is only one option for black, and that is to capture on d6. And now comes the difficult part. White needs to play aggressively with knight g8, attacking the queen. But it doesn't seem clear why does this make such a big difference. For example, the queen can move away to f7. If check on a8, the king escapes on c7, and at this stage black has already 5 pawns for the queen. The white knight doesn't seem to do much other than guarding the e7 square, so how should white continue? Quite miraculously, a simple, quiet-looking move like queen b7 makes the difference in the entire world. Now white threatens to checkmate on b8, which, in contrary to the a8 square, does not allow the black king to escape on c7. And on the other hand, if the queen captures the knight, then just queen b8, skewer wins the queen. It wouldn't have made a difference if after d6, pawn takes, knight g8, the black queen would have gone to h7, because then also the queen would still go to b7, making sure black doesn't start any checks on b1. And if queen takes knight, the same, skewer. And if the king tries to run, now that the f7 square is open, the problem is not the check with the queen, but the fork with the knight. A brilliant study by Kubel. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. As well, of course, as the very instructive endgame magic of Mikhail Tal. Thank you so much for listening, and make sure you're back next week to learn some more. Bye-bye.
Hi, this is Grandmaster Damian Lemos. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from onlinechesslessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for onlinechesslessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.